The motion carried on a Tuesday. I remember it's the exact sound of it, the Aethren Deliberative Senate's confirmation chime, a low triple tone that had been signaling the start of formal deliberation for 400 years. Delegate Vareth of the concentric reaches spoke the opening declaration in that particular cadence the Senate used for serious business, measured, unhurried, each word placed like a stone. The motion Earth's unauthorized construction of the Marant Corridor had passed the threshold, vote at 61-9. The 90-day deliberation clock had started. Earth was formally invited to suspend all construction activity pending the outcome. I was sitting in the observer's gallery on the third tier, 17 rows up, with a cup of something warm and a data pad on my knee. My name is Corin Vase. I had been the Terran infrastructure liaison to the Aethren body for 11 years. I knew the Senate's rules better than most of its members. I did not send a suspension order. I sent a message to the build team on Marant Station that said, 90 days, current pace, nothing more. The Aethren Senate's great strength, the thing its members spoke about with genuine reverence, was its procedural integrity. No sanction could be levied without full deliberation. No deliberation could be shortened without a 2/3 emergency override, required evidence of imminent harm to a member state. The 90-day clock was a protection, they said, a guarantee of due process. Every party had time to prepare its case, submit its filings, request expert testimony, enter evidence into the record. The Senate was proud of this. They had designed a system where nothing moved too fast. They had not considered that we might simply keep moving. The Marant Corridor was a transit route, a navigational lane with relay stations, fuel depots, and automated traffic management nodes cut through the inner arm's contested dead zone. The Aethren body had been discussing whether to authorize a corridor through that region for 19 years. 19 years of committee reports and feasibility studies and interdelegation working groups. Meanwhile, the dead zone stayed dead. Ships took the long route around, adding 11 days to any run between the rim territories and the core markets. 11 days per ship, every transit. Earth had the engineering teams. Earth had the route survey data. Earth had started laying relay foundations 3 years ago, which the Senate had noted and flagged, and added to a subcommittee agenda. When the flag escalated to the sanction motion, the corridor was 63% complete. 63%. The Senate's confidence was understandable. They had 90 days. We had 37% left to build. The math seemed obvious to them. They had not looked at the rate. I spent the first week of deliberation filing our formal response. A thorough, correct, respectful submission that addressed the Senate's jurisdictional concerns, cited the relevant articles of the Inner Arm Development Charter, and requested that our expert testimony be scheduled for week 6. Standard procedure. I attended the opening sessions, sat in the gallery. Notes. Delegate Vareth gave a careful presentation on the Senate's infrastructure sovereignty mandate. Several other delegates expressed concern about Earth, setting precedent for unilateral corridor construction without regional consensus. Points were reasonable. The debate was substantive. I had no quarrel with any of it. I also had dispatches arriving on my pad every 36 hours. Week 2, 71%. The relay chain was continuous from the Marant anchor point to the midpoint station. Traffic management nodes were being calibrated. The fuel depot at waypoint 4 had gone active. I flagged none of this to the Senate. There was no obligation to. The deliberation was about whether to sanction the construction. The construction was not the deliberation's business until the deliberation produced sanction. Week 3 brought the first sign that someone had done the arithmetic. A junior aide to Delegate Sorveth of the Pale Cluster stopped me in the corridor outside the gallery and asked very carefully whether I had any update on the status of construction activity. I told her that Terran infrastructure work continued under existing development authorizations, and that any relevant status information would be entered into the formal record at the appropriate time. She wrote something on her pad. I wished her a good afternoon. In week 4, Delegate Sorveth himself raised rostral motion to request an immediate construction status report from the Terran delegation. The motion required a simple majority. It failed 33 to 37. Several delegates held that compelling a status report deliberation would compromise the evidentiary process. I watched Sorvith absorb the loss with the expression of a man who had just noticed water coming under a door and been voted down on the question of whether to look at it. Week 4 dispatch, 84%. The waypoint stations were accepting test traffic. The automated routing system had processed its first trial convoy without incident. The Senate's deliberation moved into its examination phase in Week 5. Expert testimony gave mine on schedule. A measured account of the corridor's engineering timeline, its compliance with Inner Arm Development Charter provisions for unclaimed transit zones, and the economic modeling on transit time reduction, answered every question. I did not lie, omit, or obfuscate. I simply answered what was asked. Nobody asked me when the corridor would be complete. Delegate Vareth asked me, toward the end of my testimony, whether Earth would consider a voluntary suspension of construction activity in a gesture, good faith toward the deliberative process. I considered the question for a moment. Then I told him that Earth was committed to good faith and that we had demonstrated that by engaging fully with the deliberation process, filing on time and appearing for testimony. He nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand something. Could see it in the way his facial membrane drew back slightly, a tell I had learned to read in 11 years. Week 6, 91%. The transit log showed 14 convoys had run the partial route in test configuration. 0 incidents. By week 7, the gallery was quieter. Delegates arrived for sessions and left quickly afterward, without the usual corridor conversations. Several working groups that had been meeting every 3 days stopped scheduling. The energy of confident institutional process, that particular bureaucratic momentum that feels like gravity, had gone out of the room. Replaced it with something closer to a held breath. Week 8 dispatch, 97%. Final relay calibration in progress. The Merit Corridors was accepting commercial pre-registration. The closing session of the deliberation was scheduled for day 89. I arrived early. I had one item in my document case, a single printed transit record, 3 pages, showing the corridor's operational log from its soft launch date 4 days prior. 41 commercial transits completed. No incidents. Average transit time, 14 hours and 9 minutes, against the previous long route average of 11 days and 6 hours. The chamber was full. Every delegation had sent its lead member. I had not seen attendance like that since the year the hegemony of Sorvanti had petitioned for emergency. Delegate Vareth opened the session and worked through the formal agenda items with the same measured cadence he always used. When he reached the point where the deliberation record would be closed and the sanction motion put to final vote, he paused. His eyes moved to me in the gallery, then to the pad on his desk, where I assumed he had the same operational data I was holding in paper form. He asked me if the Terran delegation had a final statement to enter. I came down from the gallery to the speaker's position at the center of the chamber floor. I placed the transit record on the table in front of the delegation seats. Did not speak. I let them read the header. Merit Corridor, Commercial Operations Log, Day 4. I returned to my seat. The deliberation record was closed 17 minutes later without a vote on the sanction motion. Delegate Vareth's official notation read, motion moot. Infrastructure subject to proposed sanction is operational and in active commercial use. Sanction levy would require separate proceedings under Article 44. Governing existing infrastructure disputes. Timeline 90 days minimum. He didn't schedule those proceedings. I understand why. The corridor was already carrying 300 ships a week by the time I boarded my transport home. Sanctioning it would have meant sanctioning every cargo operator in the inner arm who had paid for a transit slot. The Senate was a procedural body. It had no mechanism for that kind of fight, and everyone in that chamber knew it. The chime that closed the session was the same low triple tone that had opened it 89 days before. It sounded exactly the same. The room it landed in was a different room entirely. Quieter, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved in while no one was watching. I had 11 years of experience in that chamber. I had sat through votes that took the ground from under us, seen filings disappear into subcommittees for a decade, watched good faith arguments dissolve in procedure. I held no particular anger about any of it. The Senate ran the way the Senate ran, but I had also read every line of the Inner Arm Development Charter. I had read it the way you read something when you know you will need it. Slowly, pencil, in the margins. The 90-day deliberation was their great protection. A guarantee, they called it, that nothing moved too fast. They should have finished the vote before we finished building.